Hello and welcome to Media7, I'm Russell Brown. In this week's program we look at two new works, one of fiction, one of fact, that examine the practice of journalism, both its frustrations and its dangers. But first, it was in 1975, on the brink of open war in Indonesia's fight for Timor-Leste, that New Zealand cameraman Gary Cunningham and his 4 media companions were murdered by Indonesian troops in Balibo. They were neither the first nor the last. This week in The Source, Sam Mulgrew tallies the global cost of the telling of truth.
For centuries, journalism has taken people into the eye of the storm. Many are threatened or kidnapped, but according to stats from the Committee to Protect Journalists, the death toll is high. So far this year, 67 journalists have died on the beat. 2011's most dangerous countries, Pakistan with 6 deaths and Libya with 5. But 8 years of war in Iraq has seen perhaps the highest toll. The conflict has claimed the lives of 151 journalists. 9 were killed in just the first 3 weeks of conflict. Of the 881 journalists killed doing their job in the past 20 years, 40% had politics rounds and 34% were war correspondents. Of those deaths, full and just investigations were undertaken in just 5% of cases. But all too often, outspoken voices are just thrown down into a hole. Around the world as we speak, there are 145 journalists in jail for doing their work. Tibetan journos in China and freedom advocates in Iran are the worst off. 69% of journalists detained were internet-based reporters and citizen journalists. Mostly, they're incarcerated either on no charge at all or on flimsy anti-state charges. For many, freedom is out of the question.
People blithely imagine that journalists are where the news is. Alas, not so. The news is where the journalists are. Thus wrote BBC journalist Martin Bell in 1995. He was referring to his experiences in Bosnia, but his observation applies anywhere, not least in our Pacific neighbour, East Timor. If our foreign press isn't in Timor reporting on a crisis, we effectively assume that no news is good news, and that with independence for Timor, so came press freedom. As Nicholas Hanson's documentary Breaking the News shows, neither was true.
During 25 years of Indonesian occupation, East Timorese journalists faced the impossible task of continuing to report the news while also living through the unfolding drama.
My friends in the police very proud of killing the other friends in FFTTL. My friends in FFTTL very proud of shooting at the police. Survive. And then my friend from Armera said, I like to kill the Lorosai. My friend from Bokau said, I would like to attack Loromon. How can I do to stop them? Sometimes people doesn't want us to film them while they are throwing stones, throwing rocks to each other. Sometimes they're trying to break your camera down when you're trying to film. They start to light into a house.
Go. New Zealand has given tens of billions of dollars and the lives of 500 soldiers to prop up East Timor. As a result,
there seems to be plenty going on. You've got to worry about it becoming a circus at some stage, though.
Land! We are fighting! Land all night!
It's just getting madder and madder, isn't it? It's marvellous. It's not marvellous for them, it's good for us.
Some of the Timorese people very enthusiastic to see the media. When they see you walking in with the camera, they just say, hey, film this, film that.
These people, they also act because you are here and filming them, right? They're just watching the crime and you are filming
I agree with
the
you
crime,
there. They should be helping, but...
So if you would a bit kind of step back, it would be great, because people don't feel encouraged.
Dozens of houses burn at night when we're not there. You ever noticed that?
Anyway, you get them during the day, so you're fine, huh? Just get your images.
Oh, there's a woman in just a 4-wheel drive with a red cross on the side, so who knows what, berating the media pack for fomenting all this. With some justification, I suspect.
Yeah, it's always the same.
Yeah.
When there is no solution, it's the fault of the press.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
That's it.
Breaking the news, producer, director and cameraman Nicholas Hansen is with me now. Welcome, Nicholas. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Russell. Great to be here.
Now, clearly this film wasn't made overnight. How did you come to start on it? Did you have any background in reporting these kinds of stories?
I'm working as a news cameraman in Australia on a freelance basis, but I was in East Timor in January going into February in 2006, making a documentary about coffee farming, pretty much, and co-ops. And so we had our introduction to East Timor at that stage and some of the politics that was going on, but really we couldn't see at that stage what was coming up. So 6 months later, having followed the news, I flew back in on the 26th of May 2006, a day after I think the Australian troops came in and basically settled things down in Dili.
Now, the key figure in the film emerges as Jose Bello, the journalist. He's quite a figure. At what point did you come into contact with him? Because he drives the film, doesn't he?
Well, Jose was working for Associated Press as a cameraman at that stage, and I, being a freelancer, I pretty much embedded, so to speak, with other more well-resourced journalists because there wasn't much transport around, pretty much. So I was embedding with the AP journalists and various other journalists, and Jose was their fixer and translator. So Jose would be up front in the front seat, looking out for smoke and what was going on, and I was sitting in with them and filming them. So I met Jose then. He subsequently got into trouble when he was in the car on his own, pretty much. The Australian Army and police picked him up and thought he may have been a spy. You know, he was a local with a cameraman. You know, he didn't have a white person with him, and he was considered to be a potential spy. So he was shook down.
Right. Well, I mean, you were with the foreign press corps there. Did you feel the need to distinguish yourself from them? Because, you know, quite frankly, they don't always emerge particularly well from the film, do they? Being
a freelancer, I arrived and basically discovered the story on the fly. I mean, I was really interested in the human rights situation in East Timor, but we walked into a crisis, and I was pretty astounded by the world attention. There was media from Portugal, of course, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia. And basically, the ex-colonial powers were really there in a way to assist, of course, but also, of course, to manage your own interests.
Yeah, one thing that emerges quite clearly from the film is, and which really, I would have to say, shocked me, is how many things happened precisely because there were foreign cameras there. Perhaps we could have a look at one of the more notable instances. We'll have a look at that now.
Des! Libre!
You shot one?
I think so. It's not moving anymore.
These shots on government troops were the first fired in the unfolding crisis.
Oof. Jeez.
We have to get out here.
Where do we go, though?
We will be trapped here, I think.
I'll go up, yeah? Yeah. We shouldn't go with them, you know? Oh, fuck. Oh, no. We're right in the middle of this here. This is bad.
Alfredo's men are hoping that this is the catalyst that brings Australian police peacekeepers into East Timor.
Did that shooting happen because the SBS team was there, do you think?
We strongly suspect it did. At that stage, Alfredo Renato had broken away from the army. He was in contact with the local fixer, Jose Bello, our main character, and David O'Shea, the Dateline SBS journalist, was basically told to go and meet him at a certain point. Now, they subsequently ambushed a bunch of soldiers who were arriving at a certain location to collect their pay. So it did appear as an ambush, but Alfredo Renato did give warnings before those shots. but subsequently a person was shot and killed, and they were the first shots in the crisis, so to speak.
And there was an even more graphic example of that with the Four Corners story that actually became an award-winning current affairs documentary, and yet appears to have been a total set-up. Talk us through that.
Well, I mean, look, I'd been there, I think, 3 days when someone approached me with the story that the then Prime Minister and the government were arming a civilian group. And I was speaking with an opposition member who would introduce herself with that story. And I thought, well, this is really tricky because you've got an opposition member who's feeding me a rumour, so to speak. Now, what happened, the Interior Minister actually later was found guilty of arming a civilian group. But what had occurred was the Four Corners team were invited to go up to a staged event away from Dili and to film this civilian group with their guns. Now, prior to that occurring, the civilian group had actually handed their guns in to the President. So, I mean, the question arises, how was the group rearmed and this staged event put on? Clearly it was a staged event to associate this group with the guns and to establish illegality. And so the Four Corners team ran with that and took off on what was a pretty shaky trajectory, I think, to basically... And what occurred was this became a political weapon for the then President, General Guzmão, to deliver to Mario Katiri, and he handed him the cassette pretty much and said, look at this, you know, we don't think you're fit for government.
It all seems amazingly savvy. All of these people seem to have been quite aware of how they could manipulate the foreign press to their own ends. And meanwhile, poor old Jose is trying to report the news and really being frustrated at every turn.
Yes, that's right. Well, later in 2008, he received leaks, and it was about the Justice Minister, now listen, the Justice Minister, that allegations the Justice Minister was involved in illegal tendering processes. Now, these leaks, Jose brought this out. He got a direct line to the leak. He sent it to WikiLeaks, of course, to protect himself. But after that, the courts came down on both him and his paper in two separate suits, and it looked like they were really looking to shut him down. So the UN were looking to arrest Jose. They didn't actually arrest him in the end. And I think that's because Jose put the call out to all of his friends, really, and a lot of his supporters in the international media, who petitioned for him.
One of the other shocking things in the film is the assassination attempt on Jose Ramos Horta, the president, for which a number of people were rather dubiously convicted, and then a year or two later they're quietly pardoned. Nothing is ever what it seems in that country.
The truth's still out there, that's right. And I think so for journalists like Jose Bello and Rosa Garcia, who I also focus on, the challenge is really out there for these ex-resistance, people who worked in the ex-resistance, they're sort of rolling in their resistance to win the peace through journalism. And but that's right, there just seems to be this series of both impunity through the court system and a lack of answers. Of course, there are shootings all around the world, and you know, to this day we don't know who the protagonist is. But personally, I think that it is a legacy of colonialism in a way that politics has invisible hands. The way things work in East Timor, a lot of what occurs behind a smokescreen, behind the scenes. And so Jose may understand and he may know a lot about what's going on, but he simply can't report it, because I think there's a lot of very skillful actions that are behind the veil, so to speak.
Are there lessons from the things you document in the film, particularly for the journalists who go in when there is a crisis and report it? What do you think we should learn from what you've depicted?
Well, I think that working with local translators and fixers is obviously the way to a story. But if we arrive with a prearranged story, then it puts that fixer or that translator into a difficult position. They're really being handed a checklist to go and achieve that story. And I think that story really needs to be thoroughly talked through with the local translator and fixer. One, so as not to put them into danger, but also to check the validity of it, because I think that often our research as outsiders is from our peers and from other correspondents rather than people on the ground. So my thinking is, and the way I get my news from East Timor is to read the Tempo Semanal blog, Jose Bello's newspaper, up on the web. So often things are translated into English, and there it is coming from the source. There's no filter, there's no, it hasn't been coded back through our editors, you know, so to speak, through our own national interest. You know, so there's a lot of foreign journalists go in and report along their national interest lines. The Portuguese report a certain way, the Australians report a certain way, maybe the New Zealanders report a certain way.
I'm sure we do, actually. Well, I think it emerges quite clearly that the people on the ground, the fixers and the reporters, are the brave ones. So thank you, Nicholas Hanson.
Thank you, Russell.
And after the break, a very different look at the modern business of news.